Chad Barraford. You're a contributor of Thorchain. Do you actually have an official title, or are you just contributor?
I guess my official title would be technical lead, but within the project we kind of shy away from titles in general, just because it just confuses and conflates things and gets distracting from the actual what we're trying to do, like from the value proposition we're trying to accomplish.
I had JT on last year, and yeah, he called himself a contributor, and it seemed like the community was very much into this, like, oh, we don't have like a CEO or whatever. This is very much like a community owned project.
The problem with having figureheads or like Jesus figures within a project is that they become the focus, the genius behind the thing, or like whatever, right? Like, and that takes the focus away from what it is that you're trying to accomplish, like value proposition of the protocol, the network, or the project that you're trying to build. And so we try to like not have any individual person be seen as like the person behind it, because that just becomes distracting from what we're trying to accomplish, which is like a DeFi protocol that allows people to move cross chain simply, easily, decentralized, KYC, like all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. And we have seen the pitfalls of worshiping a godlike figure who was the personality and the face behind a huge project, huge DeFi project, right?
Yes. Yeah, it can backfire quite significantly, right? Then it becomes like your feeling on the project is no more about your feelings about the person. Like, I don't like this person, this figurehead, whoever that they are, and be like, oh, therefore I don't like the project. And it's just like, well, they are not the project. Well, they shouldn't be the project. The project should be the project, right? And Satoshi is like a good example of this, in that like he's not really anybody. He's not really like a figurehead. I mean, he's a guy known to help, create Bitcoin, all that kind of stuff. But like outside of that, like, if you knew who Satoshi, was, and that who he was, all this stuff, like it would you become opinionated on Bitcoin based upon whether or not he was this or that, or Republican or Democrat, right, or lived in this country or lived in that country, or was like color of the skin was this or that, or like whatever. Like, it becomes a distraction.
Right. And it really doesn't even matter. And
it doesn't matter.
Yeah. After this crypto crash, I realized that I realized an important thing about human nature, which is people ascribe too much credit to other people if the other people have money. So
yes,
they think that just by virtue of having a lot of money, or managing a lot of money, that they somehow know what it is that they're doing, and then they listen to every single word, every single tweet that they make as if it were gospel. They're saying, okay, yes, I'm gonna follow everything this person says because they made their money, so I'm just gonna follow them uncritically. And then
yes,
and then we saw that some of these people turn out to be like total degens, or they got by somebody else who did better than them.
Yep.
And then it just like takes down the entire, like, literally two people, basically. It was people who basically worship like two main figureheads, and that alone took down the market. And it turned out turned out that they could get got. They weren't fail.
No, you're absolutely right. Like, people who have like a B next to their name, like as in, billionaires or whatever, like everybody pays attention to those people, even though they're talking about something that has nothing to do with what they do, or with how they even made their money, or like, it just, it's we put way too much. I remember when like Elon tweeted about anti-Bitcoin sentiment, like this is, 6 months ago or a year ago, I guess now, it's been a while. And like Bitcoin tanked just because Elon tweeted. Right. And I was just like, no, man, like, what is this?
It's I mean, but that's humans and their tendency to bandwagon. If they see somebody successful say something, they're just like, oh. Same with Dogecoin. As soon as Elon was like, I'm pro Doge.
Yep.
And it pumps that.
It pumped like crazy, right? Even like Mark Cuban, like he was all behind like the iron stablecoin, system. which obviously that thing tanked. And then like, and I think he said recently, not recently, but like a couple months ago, whatever it was, that like Voyager was one of the least risky places you can put your crypto or something like this. And then
Oh, is that what he
that's,
said?
yeah. And like, then now he did that like on a stage with the CEO next to him, right? Like,
Oh,
hand in hand. I think they're, I don't know this to be true. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but like, is it like, I think Voyager had invested into the Mavericks or something like this or whatever the hell it was. And then like, Voyager's obviously in
it's
big
one of
trouble
those
now
things.
because it's because of this whole collapse thing happening now with like CFI and all these things. And so it's just because like to iterate your point, like just because somebody's got a lot of money doesn't mean they're going to be right about this or know what they're talking about at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. The thing is, people tend to formulate opinions based on some sort of framework they use to triangulate information through. And so for a lot of people, it's just how much money do you have, but for like, but for people like me, for example, it's like the way that I formulate opinions is that, okay, I'm seeing like what the smart people around me are saying.
Yep.
But sometimes a lot of the smart people don't have any money, right?
Yeah, that's
But
true.
they, right.
That's true. I think you and I can both name people at the top of our heads who are like extremely brilliant, extremely talented, very well. A person who knows what they're doing, but maybe not the wealthiest person in the room.
Right, exactly. But they call these things months in advance. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
this is going to happen based on X, Y, and Z, and
Yeah.
it happens.
Yeah.
The next one that I'm waiting for is MicroStrategy to get liquidated, and then boom, it's gonna take us down. It is gonna the
Oh
market
my God, don't say
down.
that. That
Mhm.
would be disastrous. That would be insane. That would be oh my
I
gosh.
think it's gonna happen. So yeah. So it's like yeah, and then and then everyone's gonna flood Bitcoin after that, and then
Yeah.
they're gonna
That would be a
call
major
for
contagion just waiting to happen. That would
Oh
just spread
yeah.
out to the entire industry. Like
Oh
everybody
yeah.
would be hit hard by that. Everybody.
Boom. Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's gonna be the third wave, the third and final blow for this market to really go into bear
Oh my
hibernation.
gosh. I'm gonna hope that you're wrong about that, but you very well could be right. I
Yep.
wouldn't doubt you.
Yep. You heard it here first.
You heard it here first, people.
Yeah. So anyway, that being said, Thorchain and the builders in Thorchain are still you're still building, you're still working through this bear market. So that's one of the signals, right? The people that we talked to on this podcast are builders, and they've been
Yeah.
around for many years through several cycles, bear and bull.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter. You're just continuing to innovate no matter what the
Yeah.
price says.
Absolutely.
So yeah, you guys just launched Mainnet.
Yeah. It took us a long time to get there, years to get to that point.
Right.
Building during the bear, building during the bull, and now we're in a bear again, and we're going to keep on shipping. Just how we are as a community. But like, you're absolutely right. Like, it doesn't matter if it's a bear market, it doesn't matter if it's a bull market. It's always a builder's market. And so for me,
It always is.
It's always is. So for me and the rest of the community, we're always just fixated on what is the next thing we can build that would just, in our view, be a game changer in the DeFi space.
Well, what do you view is going to be a game changer in the next bull market?
I mean, I think the next bull market will see a larger fixation on like interchain composability. I think we're starting to see that now. We're seeing somewhat in the Cosmos ecosystem. We're just having new protocols come out, like Route, for example, and Thorchain's obviously pushing this kind of mentality as well. I think even just I think there was a funny thing of somebody tweeted they did a swap from Curve token to layer 1 BTC in a single transaction, using like Thorchain as the medium of that from 2 different DEXs. And like the Curve protocol, it's the official Curve Twitter account responded to that like, oh, we used to do this like by like the Ren protocol, right? And I'm just like, well, Ren's great and everything, but like we're talking about a cross-chain composability here of being able to a single transaction in a single like swoop. You're doing one transaction, but you're triggering a series of transactions after that fact to accomplish some task or thing that you're trying to do. And Cosmos is doing that too. I think interchain accounts is like effectively doing conceptually something similar, which is great. And so like I think interchain composability or cross-chain composability is going to be a huge thing in the next bull cycle.
Yeah, that is really where the UX innovation comes in, where you're just abstracting steps away from the end user and
Right.
just offering them the same features. So
yeah, if you think about it like this, like if I told you in order to drive a car, you had to know how to use a steering wheel and some pedals and stuff, but you also had to understand like how a carburetor works and how a pistons work and
yeah,
like mufflers and
can't
like
be
all these
bothered.
parts, you'd be like, you wouldn't like, most people wouldn't be able to do it. I wouldn't be able to do it, right? Like it's just too complex. And like that in some sense is what like DeFi is today. Like everybody has to be a car mechanic to drive a car in some sense, right? And I think what we're hoping to see in the next bull cycle, especially over the course of this bear, we'll see more protocols come out and more innovation happen that kind of abstracts away all that complexity of like the carburetor and the pistons and the fuel injectors and like all these things. And all you got to know is, oh, I got a steering wheel and I got a couple of pedals and I operate those things and I get what I want. I get from point A to point B.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where we're heading as an industry, which is where we need to get to.
Right, absolutely. So when you say Mainnet was launched, what was included in that? Right, was that which it was this particular feature, which is like Thorchain itself is settling on the Bitcoin layer 1?
It wasn't so much that. So for us, like we knew what we were building is very, very difficult and very, very like complex and ambitious. And so we weren't going to just launch and like YOLO our way into a scenario where, you know, $1 billion would be dumped into the network, you know, on day 2, which is what we sometimes see in the DeFi space. We knew that what we were doing was a lot more difficult than just writing a Solidity smart contract. And so we wanted to spend the appropriate time in like a soft launch or like a beta where we cap the liquidity on the network, right? So that if anything does happen, there's not a lot of funds at risk. So we can kind of like, you know, baby step our way into that kind of position, right? And so we spent about a little over a year in that beta phase, just kind of like fine tuning, tweaking, improving security, improving liability, including resiliency, and like kind of just getting everything so it's like a well-oiled machine in a sense. And so that was really what it was more about, was about just getting it to a place where we felt confident and good about it from a security and safety perspective. That's not to say that, you know, there's not going to be bugs in the future. Of course, it's software. Software is always going to have bugs, but like we feel good that it's ready for the mainstream now. It's ready for a wide scale adoption, a wide scale scaling. So the first kind of period was just about like getting it delivered, getting it working, getting it reliable, getting it like a good solid foundation. And then Mainnet was kind of like the indicator of like, well, now we've graduated from that kind of phase of the project, and now we're heading into the scalability and adoption thing. And so what we're doing now with like what we call DEX aggregation is that like we allow Thorchain to connect with multiple DEXs on multiple ecosystems and connect them all into one giant DEX, that every DEX has access to all of the assets and liquidity of every other DEX that the Thorchain network connects to. And so like, even if you're in like a UI, like, you know, 1inch or Osmosis or like, you know, whatever it might be, like in that UI, you actually have access to every asset on every chain, the real layer 1 native asset, which is just like, that's like an incredible thing, right? Like that's to me, it's one of the holy grails of DeFi. It's just like to make it super clean and super simple and give you access to all the things you want to have access to without jumping through so many hoops and bridges and like several wallets and like buy different gas assets and do all these things, which is just like super confusing and dangerous, I might even add. And actually get people like no more needing to wrap assets, no more needing to like do any of those kind of things. You can, if you want Bitcoin or you have Bitcoin and you want Link or you want GMX or you want Osmo or you want whatever, you can just go to like any UI and it'll show you all of the assets, and in a single transaction, give you any asset you want on any chain. That's crazy. That's like, yeah, that's so almost obvious. Like we need something like this in the industry.
It is obvious. So I actually haven't tried to use Thorchain Mainnet right now, but is this currently the UX right now?
Yes. So we are now in the process of integrating with multiple DEXs. we have lots of conversations going on at once, that they're all like moving at different speeds depending upon
Any particular ones that you could name right this moment?
I don't know if I can or cannot, and I'm shy. I don't want to like. I know some announcements are coming out, and that people will come out, but like, there are multiple, both DEXs and wallets. There's like very well known DEXs and very well known wallets that are also going to be integrating, interfacing with this, and so pretty soon you can be on. I don't want to name a specific DEX until they make the announcement themselves.
Well, okay, what about the ecosystem? You know, like, so you
Yes.
integrated Ethereum and Cosmos and Bitcoin. Which ones?
Oh, so right now we got Bitcoin, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, Doge, BNB, Ethereum, Gaia / Atom. AVAX is coming out next. It just launched on StageNet yesterday. And then after that, there's a bunch more chains planned.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, the Bitcoin ecosystem, which includes all the UTXO proof of work chains like Bitcoin, Doge, Litecoin, and then Cosmos chains, BNB, Gaia, Cosmos Hub.
Even crypto note, something we've been building for a long time. So having something like Monero or Haven, like these kind of chains, privacy chains, have a decentralized mechanism to get in and out of those chains is like huge. It's real sorely needed.
So not only is Thorchain a DEX, but you're effectively a bridge between all of these chains, right?
So I don't consider it to be a bridge, just because in my mind, when I think about a bridge, it's just how I define it. So maybe this is the wrong definition, but like a bridge is the idea of like, I have Ethereum and I want to put Ethereum on this chain. And so I bridge it, right? And create this token on another chain. That's a bridge because you're bridging the asset itself across a bridge. We're more like transferring value across, right? So it's more like a multi-chain design rather than a cross-chain design. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. But to me, like maybe the semantics are slightly off and nuanced. But the validators of Thorchain are effectively acting as relayers to act as oracles and attest to what has happened on these other chains that you're integrated with.
Correct. It requires a 2/3 majority of those validators to come to a consensus of like, oh, this Bitcoin got sent in or this Bitcoin got sent out or whatever transactions are happening.
Right. And so what happens on both chains, you know, when you mentioned that somebody moved Curve tokens and got Bitcoin back, like how did that actually happen? You know, did they have to deposit Curve tokens to Thorchain and then Thorchain actually mints and then burns on the Bitcoin chain? What
I think in that case, what happened was the UI sent the Curve tokens into, I don't know if it was Uni or Sushi or one of these DEXs, and then sent the ETH directly to Thorchain. Thorchain received the ETH, swapped it to BDC. The BDC got sent to some, BC1 address on Bitcoin. So they signed a transaction sending into them, and they got sent out to Thorchain.
Okay, so effectively, the way that the user withdrew Bitcoin out of Thorchain was through the Thorchain validator set, who controls some BEC32 address on Bitcoin, and they allow the user to withdraw based on them whatever they were custodying on Bitcoin. Okay.
In that case, it's more like the person sent in Curve tokens to an exchange on Ethereum, got swapped to Ether. Ether got sent, so the user never touched Ether itself in this case, other than their own wallet. And then like for gas is when they sent the Curve to begin with. And then the network just saw that and then said, okay, let's send Bitcoin to their BC1 address. So they didn't like pull it out. It's more like just got sent to them.
Right. But it's the validators on Thorchain doing the processing
correct
in the back end.
Right. Okay. There are several transactions that are happening, and so the user is only doing the first transaction, and then the network's basically doing the remainder of whatever number of transactions are required to accomplish the task that they're trying to accomplish.
Right. Okay. And the Thorchain's whole value prop is to abstract that away from the end user. So okay, let's talk about the security model because
Mhm,
um, I did talk about this in my interview with JT last year.
mhm,
Actually, just right around this time last year, in fact,
mhm,
exactly a year ago. The security model of Thorchain is important because obviously if at any point the value that is currently collateralized or staked on the Thorchain blockchain, if it ever falls below the value that is being transferred, deposited or withdrawn, um, then obviously the Thor chain validators potentially could collude and steal the money instead
mhm,
of
mhm,
acting in good faith. So
mhm.
what's preventing them economically from doing that?
Yeah, so that's a good question to ask. So you're actually right. So the validators are putting up a bond or stake, however you want to phrase it, of value, and then they're protecting some other amount of value of BDC and Ether and Tether and various assets. And so because each of the liquidity pools is comprised with Rune, which is the base asset of the network, and then some other asset, being Bitcoin or Atom or whatever, those two assets, the amount of Bitcoin or Ethereum or Atom in the network has a relationship to the amount of Rune that's in the pool. So if the value of Rune dies for some reason, right, something happens and Rune just plummets 50% in an hour or something like this, that creates arbitrage opportunity for all the bots to start putting in Rune and taking out the BDC and taking out the Ether, taking out all these assets before it becomes economically insolvent. And so the network always ensures at all times that all of the validators never have access to assets that are worth more than what they put up as their bond.
Hmm. Okay.
Does that make
Sorry.
sense?
So okay, so the validators don't actually have access to the BTC or the ETH.
Yeah, today would require at least, I think I want to say it's 12 or 13 validators to collude to have access to that BDC.
Mhm.
But they would be putting up hypothetical numbers of just like, oh, they put together $20 million of Rune and they have access to, let's just call it $8 million of BDC or whatever. And so yeah, they can go ahead and steal that $8 million of BDC, but then they're burning the $16 million worth of Rune that they've put up as their bond. So it's always economically non-profitable to do such a thing.
Okay. So, and just to be clear, they're on mainnet, they're just staking Rune.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct. You actually have to do Rune. This is actually kind of a fascinating thing. If you were to do something else, say you were to do Bitcoin as the asset instead of Rune, that would make the network insecure, believe it or not, as counterintuitive as that might sound. And that is because the Rune asset is tied to the value of the network, right? And so if somebody just 2/3 attacked, Sybil attacked the network and stole all the assets, right? The Rune would go to zero, right? But if it was Bitcoin, well, Bitcoin wouldn't go to zero. Nobody really cares if Rune dies, right? Because Bitcoin's still going to be worth what Bitcoin's worth. And so if you were to Sybil attack with Bitcoin as the bonded asset, then you can just take back the Bitcoin that you bought plus all the everybody else's Bitcoin and Ethereum and like various other assets, and you walk away very profitable. But because Rune is tied to the network and you take all the Bitcoin and Ethereum and all the random assets, the Rune value almost instantaneously goes down to zero. So you all that 80, 100, 400 million, whatever the hell the quantity of Rune that you bought to acquire and own to get to that place is going to plummet to zero. And then everything this you're going to walk away with, but this is going to be worth a lot more than what this is going to be worth.
Yeah, that being said, for someone to start as a validator on Thorchain, how much is that now to get into mainnet?
Today, it's the minimum requirement is 300,000 Rune, but there's always a competition to get in. Like the person with the highest bond who's waiting to get churned into the network is the one that gets chosen. And so it's actually much higher than that. It's around like 500,000, just because there's such a high demand to become a validator on this network that like people are willing to go, up and beyond. And so right now it's about 500,000, which is like, over $1 million.
Mm-hmm. So why is there such a high demand to become a mainnet Thorchain validator, given that the startup cost is relatively high compared to other blockchains that are starting at Genesis, where the bond of collateral is like much less than $1 million USD.
Yeah, I mean that's largely just because the APY is there, like to support it, right? So the APY is between 10 and 15%, depending upon how well your node is operated. Like if you're a crappy
Is that
node, you
just the
get less.
staking yield?
Yeah, that's just the staking yield for you as a validator. We don't do delegated proof of stake like most other Cosmos chains. A lot of our Cosmos chains do. So the only stake in there is the ones that are owned by the operator himself. Which technically be bonded providers, but that's a separate thing. But like, yeah, they provide their own rune. They build a node. They put up their $1 million worth of rune. They churn in. They make a 10 to 15% yield in that, and they walk away pretty happy.
Okay. And when you say walk away, does that mean that a lot of the validators tend to just like pop in, pop out, take profit or no?
Like generally speaking, like once a validator churns in, they won't be churned out for a few months at minimum. I mean, unless they choose, they can like tell the network, like, hey, kick me out. I want to leave, and have an orderly exit. But that almost never happens, or it's very rare at least. Like the bear market happened, and some people start pulling out because of that, which is just that's expected. That happens in any bear market with any chain, so it's not a big deal to me. But for the most part, people just are just long hodling, and most of the time they barely even take any profits from it. They just kind of let it sit and have the interest earn more interest, right? And just kind of let it kind of develop this bond size just from the yield earned.
By the way, if you're not familiar with the terminology that we're using, please watch the primer that we did with JT last year. It's on Interchain FM in audio format, or it's on the Cosmos Network YouTube, because that was before I started the YouTube on my own separate channel. That's just an FYI. Okay, so going back to talking to you, Chad, my question is, okay, so given that we've seen a downturn, and alluding to what I said earlier, which is the potential for this market to go even lower than it currently is, what's how does that affect the security model of Thorchain, right now, given that that's, if more people are just like pulling out more and more, does that affect?
No, it does. So Rune's price doesn't need, there's not like a minimum Rune's price needs to hit for it to remain solvent, to remain safe, or these things. That's just not how it's designed. And so there's this thing called the incentive pendulum built into the network, where the yield generated is split between the node operators and the pools, like the liquidity providers, right? And how much yield each person or each group of people make is depending upon this incentive pendulum, which is basically based on how much Rune is in the pools versus how much Rune is in the bond, right? So if things get a little bit off kilter, where like the pools get too high relative to the bond or something like this, the yield swings towards the nodes, and the nodes start earning a much higher yield, and the LPs make a lower yield. So it incentivizes the LPs to start kind of withdrawing their assets, and incentivizes the nodes to start adding more Rune on that side to kind of like swing that system back to like, to an economically optimal position, right? So in either case of scenario, no matter what happens in the price of Rune, or just the bear market, bull markets, who cares? This system just dynamically just operates the way that, and it puts the right forces on the free market to adjust itself to keep everything economically secure.
Yeah. So right now prices are down. So where does that pendulum swing right now? Is it? It's given more yield to the stakers, the validators, and less yield in the liquidity pools?
I think right now, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be mistaken, it's actually quite optimal. So I think the yield right now is like a 50-50 between the node operators and the LPs, which is how it's designed to be. It's designed to have that kind of happy middle ground, right? So the pendulum is working quite effectively, even in this bear market.
How much is currently locked on Thorchain right now?
Total value lock right now is 300 million.
So how much are LPs making right now?
It depends on the pool. So some pools are higher, some pools are lower. Let's see here. But right now I'm looking at this dashboard. It's between On the low end, it looks like around like 7%, and on the high end, it looks like around 30%, depending upon which pool you're in.
Yeah. So during the Terra collapse, did you see UST and Luna holders trying to withdraw out of it and exit into the pools that it was those coins were pooled with?
So that actually didn't happen on Thorchain's case because the network actually detected some unreliability on the Terra network and paused itself. So we have these like security measures built into the network today that is like dynamic, and the network defends itself from various forms of attacks, right? So when it notices something that's like, this ain't quite right, something's not working right here, it like dynamically the network itself will pause the Terra chain. And so it actually paused the Terra chain because the Terra blockchain was so inundated with blocks that the validators full nodes couldn't keep up to the tip. There were always like hundreds and hundreds of blocks behind, which is problematic for what we're trying to accomplish on this thing.
You mean Thorchain's validators couldn't keep up with the tip of Terra?
The Terra full nodes that the validators were running
Yeah.
were hundreds of blocks behind, and they couldn't keep up just because the throughput was just too much for those nodes to be for the full nodes to be able to handle.
Yeah, as Terra was getting spammed by transactions.
Yes, exactly. And so the network actually paused itself, and then people couldn't withdraw their funds at that time. So the network just got like left in that kind of state. And so once the Terra network calmed down and got back to some sort of like reasonable like state, the network continued. And then we allow the LPs just to leave. So we paused trading on the network as a community. We chose to pause the trading on that particular chain. And so you couldn't arb the price anymore, just because it just would have arbed to zero because Luna is worth like nothing and UST was worth like 10 cents or whatever the hell the number was. And so like that gave time for the LPs to just extract their funds before, like they're more so the Rune, because the Rune's the thing that's actually still worth something and not so much the Luna or the UST, but like it gave them the opportunity to actually get back their Rune without losing it from some crazy arbitrage situation. So it actually was very helpful.
Okay. So that process happened all rather automatically, you're saying?
Yes.
So as Luna was collapsing, the Thorchain already paused any transactions, IBC transactions between those two chains, Terra and Thorchain. And then
it was an IBC, but yes, right.
Not IBC. Stop deposits of UST and Luna.
Yep.
And then the LPs of those pools had the time to just withdraw their Rune from the pool.
Right.
They're Luna and Rune.
Luna and Rune
and UST.
They got the Luna back and their UST and everything. Wasn't obviously worth too many pennies, but
okay.
But they still got it back.
That pool got deprecated or something.
Yep. Then that's the whole chain, what we call Ragnarok, which is basically just like having the pool explode, and then all the money goes back to everybody who was an LP automatically. If anybody who didn't already pull out just got pulled out automatically.
Interesting.
And so it just exploded itself out, and then we listed the entire chain and then carried on. I mean, we had like a third of our TVL just be almost zeroed in a very short period of time from this whole Terra thing, and everything worked not perfectly, but pretty swimmingly. It's one of the lessons learned. We had some problems over a year ago when we got an exploit or two, and we realized we need to take a different approach to security than what most DeFi projects do. And we took a much more defensive approach where we just built in these automatic systems, these like big giant walls that kind of come down when it notices something that's not quite right. Like the network is insolvent. It thinks it should have X amount of ETH, but it actually has Y amount, and it's so just automatically pauses itself before funds are actually lost, or they use things to safeguard those things. And so we have a series of kind of like checkers within the code base that just verifies that everything looks right. And if anything goes off askew, the network just says, let's just pause it, let humans come in, analyze it, fix it, carry on, before we have into a much more significant problem.
So can you talk about that exploit and what was the specific lesson learned? Because the exploit came after I interviewed JT last year.
So that was like in the very early days when we first launched our public beta. I think it was like a month out or something like this. One of the things we learned was we needed to make our bug bounty program more public. We already had a bug bounty program, but we weren't good about like broadcasting it out. That's one of the mistakes we made as a project. And so we went through to a Mutify to be like kind of official procedure and process, put it up on Hacker News, put it on in the README of the, this and the website, blah, 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 these places. That was one thing we learned. Second thing we learned was that we went through a lot of audits after that had happened and a lot of audits before that happened. And none of the audits we had, we spent probably close to $1 million or somewhere around there. None of those audits actually revealed anything of value to us. I think we had in total, like maybe 9 or 12 between that number. I think 10 or 11 official ones, I think, and then like a series of unofficial ones. And none of them revealed any actual real like P1 security issues. But when we hired our own team, we actually built a security specific team that they're like software engineers, they're security engineers. And there's a team of those individuals who've been hacking the DeFi space for years and been quite successful at that. And we built that team, and that team was very effective to find, issues and things that need to be addressed and fixed. And so like that became a much more effective means for us to actually find issues, was building our own security team. And then they actually do the process, not only just auditing the code, but like doing it continuously. Like every time there's a PR or a code change, they have to approve it before it gets merged to the main branch, just to make sure that all the code changes being made are always being continuously audited all the time by security-minded individuals. That was another thing we learned was really, really important. And then the other thing we learned was that whenever you have a piece of software, especially in the DeFi space, you will never know if there are more bugs or exploits or things that they're in it. Like it's an unknowable thing. You know that you don't know. It's a known unknown. And so rather than trying to like seep through hundreds of thousands of lines of code and looking for a small needle in a haystack in a matter of speaking, it's more effective to do these blanketed approaches to security, so that even if somebody found some sort of exploit, in at least the vast majority of the cases, and they were to execute on that, the network would have the ability to protect itself and keep the funds into the network before the funds are sent out and lost to somebody else, right? And one of the fascinating things with this idea that I think is really really interesting is that one of the things we added was the concept of delayed outbounds. And so the amount of value leaving the network has a viscosity to it, if you want to use a term like that, where the more value trying to leave the network in a short period of time, the longer outbound transactions are delayed, up to 1 hour, at most 1 hour. And so if somebody tried to hack the network and pull out $10 million, that outbound transaction would be delayed for an hour. And that would give the community 1 hour time to be like, wait a minute, this huge swap's coming through, it doesn't look right. Let's pause this thing, figure out what's happening, and then fix it, and then carry on, right? And one of the fascinating things about that is that it actually flicks the economics of being a black hat to become a white hat, because the amount of funds that you can extract before the community can notice it is actually a relatively small amount. And you'll actually make more money as a white hat responsibly disclosing some sort of bug or exploit that you might have discovered, up to $1 million in the current bug bounty program we have today. You'll make up more money doing that than you would just actually executing the bug and extracting all those funds. You'd make 200,000, maybe 100,000, something like this, but you wouldn't make that mil, right? And so it actually changed the economics to flip black hats to become white hats, because it's more profitable to do it now.
What if they found a $200 million exploit and, based on the viscosity, they're able to, take 10 million of that, and the bug bounty's upper bound is only 5 million or whatever?
Yeah, so even if it was 10 million, that would delay that transaction up 1 hour before that 10 million could extract. I mean, if you did $1,000 small trades that led up to 10 million or whatever, just instead of one large transaction, a bunch of small transactions, those smaller ones would get out, but each one would cause the next one to be more delayed and more delayed and more delayed and more delayed. And so you'd be able to extract maybe 100,000 or 200,000 mathematically speaking, but you wouldn't be able to get to that million number, because the network, we've actually designed the viscosity of this feature relative to what the bug bounty program actually is. So it always kind of ensures that.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. So the protocol is aware of a bug bounty, and it's got that built in.
it's got that, in a sense, it's got that literally built into its code base. In a sense, it's actually quite fascinating.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so is the bug bounty drawing from some sort of community pool, something on chain?
No, I mean the bug bounty itself is managed by the treasury. So if and we've had this happen, people submit a bug, we pay out a bug bounty. We've done that in the past. That comes from the treasury, doesn't actually come from the network itself, but the network is aware of that bounty and protects the network with that in mind effectively.
Last sort of concept that I want to touch on is your slip-based fee model, because only 2 weeks ago, which was in June, Bancor V3 came out saying that, okay, we got to pause impermanent loss protection. And the reason for that is because this bear market turned it so that it screwed our LPs. In fact, so this feature turned out not to be a feature and rather a bug, and there's some interesting conversation around that, around Thorchain too, because you guys also have impermanent loss protection. Can you talk about that?
ILP is an interesting concept that Bancor was the first one to kind of position something, and we kind of watched what Bancor doing. We liked conceptually what they were trying to accomplish, and so we looked at the math of like, well, if we had ILP right now, we just look at the actual LPs in the network, and everybody were to mass leave, just like everybody just left in 1 second, whatever, how much room would be paid out in ILP? And we calculated it was like less than 1%, like 1% of what the reserve actually has. It's not minting coins, like Bancor just mints coins out of nothingness, and so they just have this infinite mint issue. And they're like,
is that why it broke down for them, because of their
partially
remodel?
Because like in Bancor's case, like they spent more in permanent loss protection payout in like 2 days than the previous like 9 months combined or something like this. Like it was really. It swung very hard in a certain direction.
Yeah,
and
that was some sort of like Federal Reserve stimulus check kind of thing, right?
It was pretty, yeah. But in Thorchain's case, like even with the downturn of the market, and which is obviously not good for ILP, like that's still the amount that if everybody were to leave like today, hypothetically, how much room would be there? And there's actually a live dashboard you can go to that Nine Realms has. You can actually see the graph. But I think last I looked, it was like about 2 million room, which is like 1.5% of the reserve. It's still like peanuts relative to what the reserve actually has, and so it's not really a threat for us, in our case. But partially because like that the slip-based fee model, as you brought up earlier, like it's very effective, and that on the average swap fee is less on Thorchain than it is on another DEX, but the yield generated by the LPs is higher than it is on another DEX. As counterintuitive as that sounds, and that's just because most people are making small transactions in swaps, like a few $1,000s or whatever it is for, whatever, a few $100. And then you have somebody come through who's this big giant whale who wants to make this huge transaction and then opts in to pay a larger fee. Like they made the choice to do so. They knew what they were doing and they paid a larger fee, and that larger fee goes to the LPs. And so because of that kind of like of that math, the LPs tend to make more money with a slip-based fee model than they do in like a simple XYK 30 bips kind of approach. And because of that, the chances that somebody actually is experiencing IL after 100 days is extremely small. It's more likely in a bear market, but it's still very small.
Am I understanding it correctly in thinking that the reason why it works for Rune is because you're not actually minting new money to make up for the IL that has been the impermanent loss, but rather it's just because it is compensating LPs from existing usage, than creating it out of thin air?
Yeah. I mean, I think both are at play here, right? I think both are contributing to this situation. Internally, like we've never even had the conversation of like, should we or should we not pause ILP? Like that never even came up in conversation, to be honest. Even after the whole Bancor thing, like nobody even asked the question, because we look at the math of it and we're like, nothing to be concerned about.
Yeah, well, that's everything on my end. What is there anything that we missed that you want to touch on?
We talked about DEX aggregation, which I think is a pretty interesting thing. And another thing I kind of wanted to touch on, I think is kind of fascinating for people, is that we have this new design that we're working on. Hopefully it'll come out in a couple months or so, or whatever it is. But like, it's the idea of a single asset yield. And so you can provide liquidity like BDC, for example, into the BDC pool, but not take on the risk or the price risk or the price motions of the Rune asset. And so you can provide BDC and then get BTC yield without taking on any other exposure to any other asset in the network. And so it's just like legitimately like BTC yield on your BTC straight up, no IL, nothing like this. And the network is looking to support that in the next couple of months, which is going to be a pretty big game changer in my view.
Can you explain how that's actually done? So if I deposit BTC and I earn BTC yield, like
Yes.
like interest on Bitcoin.
Yep. Layer one
with Bitcoin.
native Bitcoin yield without
How's
any.
that done?
Yeah, it's a bit
Who's the
complicated.
counterparty?
The counterparty is the protocol itself. And so you are in the end, you're depositing Bitcoin into the pool still, right? With this pool, this Bitcoin and Rune, but you're basically taking a position like I put in, 1 BTC is my deposit. And so I'm acquiring basically 1 unit. We call it a synthetic Bitcoin in our case, but like we call it synthetic Bitcoin that you basically are owning. And then any yield the pool makes, you get a percentage of that yield because you're providing some liquidity to that pool. And then the counterparty risk is done by the protocol itself. So the protocol itself has like 170 million Rune, which is more than the pool's 4 or 5x, whatever the hell the number is. And so like the network itself is taking on the Rune exposure and kind of doubling down on its own asset, right? Like it's got diamond hands for Rune, right? Obviously the network can't be bullish and more bullish on any other token than Rune because it's from the network perspective, that's the thing. And so like it's just taking on that Rune exposure. And so before those synthetics would take on the risk to the LPs themselves, but with this change that relieves that pressure from the LPs, and actually now the protocol itself takes on the exposure.
So then is the protocol buying Bitcoin to supplement the Bitcoin interest for the staker?
Technically, yes. It's actually becoming an LP into the pool, and so it's actually taking Rune and depositing Rune to the pool, and basically half of that Rune gets sold into BTC in terms of the value of the pool. It's like it's buying ownership of the pool, and so it's effectively owning both Rune and BTC, and that's that part that is adding that liquidity to the pool kind of takes away that risk.
Okay, so it's buying the BTC from the other BTC LPs.
Not so much the other LPs. It's buying it from the market more accurately because it's adding.
How?
Because you're adding value into the pool, right? And then by doing like adding Rune into the pool, and by doing so, an arbitrage bot is going to buy Bitcoin off the market and add to the pool, taking out.
I see. Okay,
Rune.
I
see. So you're not buying it from the other LPs. You're more just like you're providing more value in the pool, which then arbitrage bots
and then
add in the Bitcoin.
Yeah, the arbors are going to the centralized markets, taking Bitcoin, depositing more Bitcoin to Arbit.
Yeah. I mean, in reality, it's a lot more complicated than this. And there's a GitLab issue. People are welcome to read and comment and tell us why we're wrong or right or whatever. But like, I think this is like, to me, one of the holy grails of the space is like being able to get asset yield on any asset of your choosing, no matter what chain that it has to, it could be Atom token, it could be Osmo, it could be, Bitcoin, it could be Doge, it could be Monero, right? It doesn't really matter. All of those assets are treated the same. It's asset and chain agnostic. And so like you could get that yield no matter what chain or asset it is. And that's pretty amazing. I mean, we've never had the ability to earn a yield on Bitcoin in a decentralized way, maybe with the exception of mining itself, like being a Bitcoin miner. But even that requires like, tens of thousands of dollars of investment, blah, blah, which is outside the hands of, most Bitcoiners. But so like, this is, I think, a big leap forward of actually bringing DeFi to Bitcoin or DeFi to Doge or DeFi to whatever chain we're integrated with, rather than trying to bring them out of their chain into somebody else's chain and then bringing them to DeFi, bringing DeFi to them, which is a very different mentality. I think it's what differentiates us from other projects.
Mm-hmm. And what happens in the bank run case where everyone wants to withdraw their Bitcoin because they said, I've had enough yield and I want my collateral back and my interest, and basically drain the pool?
No, I wouldn't drain the pool because the act of withdrawing it. So if say you had one BTC and you were in there for a year, and let's just say you had 1.2 BTC at the end of the year, and you say, let's exit. The second you leave, you've now created an imbalance in the pool. Now there's more value on the Rune side than there is on the BTC side. So that's an arbitrage opportunity. Some arbitrage bot's going to put in that BTC and take out some Rune, to balance that pool. So it's like, liquidity pools in general like tend to have like an infinite supply of BTC or Rune or whatever the asset is, just because as soon as you create an imbalance, somebody buys it off the market, puts into the pool to replace the BTC that just left. The more worrying scenario for me in this thing is more of like, if Rune's price is diving relative to BTC, right? That's when it becomes, then basically the network has to like start putting more Rune to the pool, right? To kind of like, to rebalance it back to quorum in a sense, right? So the reserve is constantly putting more Rune to the pool in this type of situation. It has more than enough Rune to do so, and Rune's not minted in the same way that it is for like Bancor or other assets. So it's a hard cap supply of 500 million. So it has plenty of that to do so. It has more Rune in the reserve than like the pool 3 or 4, 5x, whatever the number is. I don't even know what's in my head, but like significantly amount. And so it has plenty of space. Not to mention, it also, like when it's providing this Rune to the network, it's generating a yield. So the protocol becomes, at this point, profit seeking, and it's just earning a yield from all these things. And so it's just building up its own reserve over time and getting wealthier and wealthier in a matter of speaking.
I'm just thinking of a Luna Black Swan event. So, there's probably there's an upper bound there, right? Where you run out. Let's talk about the upper bound, where the value of Rune in the pool is significantly lower than the BTC. So you need to keep injecting reserve into it. At what point does the reserve run out?
It can just because, so the pool itself can only have so much in it. Like it's not like a Uniswap or some of these other ones where like there's just an unbounded amount of funds. Like it could be $100 billion, like some crazy amounts. The amount of value in the pools has to be relational to the amount of security, as we were talking about earlier in the conversation about amount of security. So you couldn't have like $100 billion unless you had $300 billion, $200 billion, whatever it is on the security side, right? And so that would inherently mean that the value of Rune is much higher than it is now, in which case the value of the Rune in the reserve, which is, almost 200 million Rune, which is, basically close to half the supply, right, is readily available to support as it needs to.
Are you saying that if at any point the value in the pool loses parity with the value that is collateralized on chain through staking, that it stops deposits into that pool?
Yes, correct. Yeah, if you try to add liquidity or mint a synth or whatever you say, that kind of like creating more value in an asset in a pool, outside of swapping, of course, like it'll stop it and refund you whatever you sent in.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Right. And that would be the right thing to do, right? To like not rug anyone.
Right. So that's obviously an important thing, is not rugging anybody, of course, right? So something we try to avoid, right? So
right.
Yeah. So we had these economic, design decisions to ensure that could never happen, and we have to put these security things in place so that we had these hard caps. In the beginning, we had soft caps on the pools. We capped it like $5 million, something really tiny in the earliest days, and then like we kind of inched the soft caps up over time. But there's always going to be a hard cap, right? Which is basically the amount of Rune in the pools will not exceed the amount of Rune in the bond.
Got it.
That's basically what it is.
Got it. Okay, great. That's a more interesting security model. Yeah, the BlockFi Celsius thing. It was really just Quadriga at a really much larger scale, and they kept accepting, and Voyager. They kept accepting deposits even as they knew they were
in trouble.
Yeah, so that's messed up.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's comical to me about all this situation is that they're taking all the points about TradFi that we all kind of hate and disdain, and then like inject it into the blockchain space,
right?
And then calling it something else, right?
Right.
But it's just like, but fundamentally the same problems you had before of like just like no transparency. We don't know if you're solvent or insolvent, right, on BlockFi. But I want to know before I'm depositing funds whether or not you're solvent, right? That's an important thing for me to know as a potential investor or whatever. And the fact that I can't do that is like one of the problems we have with like traditional banks.
Non-transparent.
Completely non-transparent. And so a DEX like Thorchain or other DEXs, like with absolute certainty that it has every sat that it's supposed to have, and that's publicly verifiable in any given moment in time, right? And so you know that you're in a good space when you go to deposit assets onto Thorchain, but you don't know that when you're doing it with a Celsius or BlockFi or these things.
Right. And it programmatically stops you from adding more deposits if at any point the protocol is insolvent.
It programmatically stops it when you're, if adding this liquidity is going to shift the economic incentive to make it profitable to attack the network, then the network won't allow you to add it, right? And even if there's a situation where the network becomes insolvent because it's missing ETH or missing BTC or something happened, like whatever happened, like it pauses itself autonomously in that second, right? So that nobody can deposit more into it or take anything out or in, or just not even interact with it, just like pause everything until we figure out what's happened, deploy a fix, whatever that fix might be, or whatever happened, and then resolve it and then carry on. Nothing happened.
Yeah, cool. This is the power of DeFi.
I think this is the thing I think that we're missing in DeFi is like we need like these kind of short circuits.
Right.
So like you can't just like open it up to the wind and like whatever happens, and like you need to have these like these things in these things in place. Like if Wormhole had implemented the security features of Thorchain after we had our exploits, we create these new security like implications. Like if Wormhole did that, they would not have lost those like 300 and something millions of dollars just by having simple checkers of like, are we insolvent?
Yeah, right. And we know that the net exporters of value using DeFi tend to be of the North Korean race. Yeah.
I don't know. Is that true? I have no idea.
A lot of it, yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised. I would not surprise me.
Or Russian, just because a lot of the phishing attacks are from like this Blue Narov group. Like the biggest exploit from a few months ago on Axie Infinity was North Korean. So right, and we're here we are, the chumps that are trying to build value for this whole ecosystem. Meanwhile, it's just getting sucked out by Anyway, okay, cool. This was a really insightful interview, Chad. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're a true Chad.
By the way, that actually is, I get asked this all the time, like, yes, that is actually my name. My mom gave it to me since I was a little one.
Yeah.
It's always been, I actually have a twin brother. His name is Drew. So like, we've always had these names our entire lives. Yeah.
Was born a Chad, will stay a Chad.
Was born a Chad, staying a Chad.
Yep. Okay. Well, yeah. Thank you so much for coming on Interchain FM.
Thank you.